But now let's talk more about the volume aspect and how to split up your volume as you do progressive overload with it and get into very large numbers of sets for all of your different muscle groups, which can be a bit overwhelming for anyone who is an intermediate or advanced level athlete, especially because something that you will become very aware of is that there is an ideal number of sets to be doing per session. And when you go far beyond that, you're no longer doing good work. And that ideal per session volume is about 10 working sets, okay? That means around 10 good, hard sets. All right, now this is a relative, which is why I said the words about and around, and it varies depending on how hard you are training. When I say working sets, that means that that number does not include warm-up sets, okay? And it's relative to how hard you're training in that if you are lifting heavy, doing 6 reps or less and focusing more on strength and power, then it's actually going to be less than 10. It's going to be about 8. All right. But if you are training lighter, you could actually do more than 10. You could do 12. Or maybe even more than that, especially if you are doing low RPE training. Then you could even do more in one session. And you could do even more if you are doing a low impact type of training, such as training with resistance bands or doing endurance training. So at the beginning of a block of progressive overload, if you are training with a 6 RPE and doing a lot of light, high rep work, then you could be doing full body sessions where you're doing 15 or 16 sets in that session. You could be doing 3, maybe 4 pushes, 4 pulls, 4 or 5 legs, and then an additional set of shoulders, an additional set of biceps, triceps, maybe an additional set of calves or hamstrings. You could do 16 sets if you are taking it easy enough to do that. And speaking of arms and shoulders and calves, after your hard working sets, you can always tack on a little bit of accessory work to the end of your workout or burnout sets if you do not care that they may be low quality, which they often will be if they are after 10 or 12 or so good hard working sets, okay? And that's why they're called accessory work. But the fundamental principle that you need to understand is that the more work you do, the more energy you have spent, and you only have a finite amount of energy to spend in every session, okay? And so the more energy you have spent, the lower quality the work becomes, which is why there is no point in doing 2 to 3 hour sessions, because at that point the entire second half of the session will be of poor performance and you'll be lagging throughout all of those sets, and there will be just too much fatigue, so you'll be getting poor results from that. All right, that would be what would be called junk volume. Okay, so the cap to your session time is between 1 and 1.5 hours. That is how long it should take for you to warm up and then get in the right amount of good hard working sets, and then maybe do a little bit of accessory work, a burnout set, and a cool down. Okay, that should take no more than about 1.5 hours tops, not including any time you might have spent going to the bathroom, waiting for a piece of equipment to get freed up, or chatting with your gym bros. And while those first 2 are things you can't control, chatting with your gym bros is, and that will affect the intensity of your workout. So don't let that get in the way. Save it for after you are done. Try to keep your training consistent and at a certain level of intensity for a straight hour to an hour and a half. And so what this cap on session time and volume means is that the more you add volume as you do progressive overload, the more you will need to divide it up into extra sessions. Because as you add approximately 1 set to every major movement pattern from week to week, as you should be doing, that will mean that over the course of a few weeks or so, you will have reached the precipice of that cap. And so what that means is that at certain points in your progressive overload, when that occurs, you are going to have to change your split. This is another reason why it is so important for you to have watched all of the previous classes, because you're going to need to have a working knowledge of all of the different types of splits that I went over in phase 4 on training technique. So if you have not seen that, press pause on this one and go watch that one first. But otherwise, moving on, how to do this is that your progressive overload should probably start with a 3-day-a-week full body split, and then advance to a 4 and maybe even a 5-day full body split. And what you would do is you continue to increase the volume even more beyond that would be to change it to a 6-day-a-week upper-lower split. And then in order to increase the volume even more beyond that, you would go into a multiple session per day split with 6 hours of rest and a couple meals between sessions. And this is something you would especially do if you are training to become a professional competitive athlete, if you are training for a certain type of sport, or even if you are doing a lot of light high volume. That really comes in handy when you are doing high volume and reaching your MAV or MRV for all of your muscles at once. But if you're not doing any of that and you do not want to train multiple times a day, you certainly do not have to. But just consider that they also do not have to be big, long sessions, okay? You don't have to be doing 2 hour-and-a-half long, extremely exhausting sessions in a day. In fact, you can do 2 short sessions. And when I've done this before, there's a couple of different ways that it would look, all right? There was a time where I would have a morning workout that was extremely light. It was more like a warm-up workout. It was mainly just to get me primed and ready for the day physically, okay? And then later on in the day, 6 or more hours later, I would have a serious hard hypertrophy training routine. And then also there's times where I do endurance training sports such as biking and swimming, and so I will do them at a certain point in the day, like the afternoon, and I will spend a lot of time doing that because the lighter and lower impact the work, the longer your sessions can be, okay? So when you're doing endurance training and sport training, if you're not doing it at a high impact, you can really draw that out. And so I might bike 10 or 12 miles or swim for an hour or 2 or both during the afternoon. And in the morning or evening, several hours before or after that, I will do a light hypertrophy training just to maintain as much of my muscle mass as I can. So that's how multiple sessions per day looks for me with my specific types of athletic training. And again, this is going to be highly personalized and customized and auto-regulated to yourself and whatever types of training you're doing as well as your goals. And even if you are not a serious athlete who's trying to become a professional or anything, you might find that instead of doing an hour or an hour-and-a-half of training, doing 2 half-hour sessions, one in the morning before work and one after work is actually much more manageable for you, okay? You might find that after work, if you train for about an hour or so, that could just be very exhausting to do on top of your work day, depending on what type of work you do. And so if you don't want to do a big workout after work, you could do a shorter morning routine and afternoon routine, and you could find that that is not only more manageable, but a much greater way for you to stay healthy and feel good in your body if that's what you are training for, as many people are. So the multiple sessions per day isn't just for professional athletes. It's something that a lot of people do when they're just training for health and general fitness and trying to, be as active as they can. Or for people who are extremely busy, as many people are, and do not have the time to train for a straight hour to an hour-and-a-half all at once, okay? So keep that in mind. Now, if you are a serious athlete and are training to become a professional or already are a professional, and you are pushing yourself as hard as you can with progressive overload, and thus you don't mind some complicated programming, then you can actually benefit from some even more elaborate programming, because what you will notice is that when you are training all of your muscles in your entire body to the max, that not only does each of them have a different work capacity, but a different recovery time too, due to them all having different SRA curves. So what this means is that ideally, all of your muscles should be trained with different frequencies if you are really trying to optimize your training and do as much progressive overload as possible and train yourself in the best possible manner. So instead of trying to find a volume and frequency for all of your muscles that will have the same SRA curve and recovery time that will allow you to keep that same frequency of training like every 48 hours or so, which has the benefit of simplicity and being easy to program and do and understand, it has the drawback of leaving your larger muscle groups a bit under-trained, okay? So because of the fact that they have a greater work capacity, they have a greater SRA curve when they are being trained to the max and thus take longer to recover. And so in order to train them in a way that forces them to recover at the same time as your smaller muscles which recover quicker, you are doing less work with them and not training them to their full capacity. So for big muscle groups like your back and quads, which are super important, they are oftentimes getting undertrained when you're doing splits such as the full body and the upper lower split, training everything in the same exact frequency. All right. And so if you are a serious professional athlete who is a bodybuilder who is trying to get the most hypertrophy, or for whatever else you might be training, it's pretty important that you train your largest muscles to their full capacity. So in order to optimize your training for hypertrophy, you need to realize that bigger muscles have a greater work capacity, especially load-wise, but then take longer to recover. And smaller muscles require lighter loads, but then recover quicker. And ideally, you should be training all of your muscles to the max at the end of your block of progressive overload, that is, right? And then be giving your smaller muscles 1 to 2 days to recover, and then your bigger muscles 3 to 4 days to recover. And as you will have learned in the last class, which you should have taken before this one, with that frequency index, every muscle has its individual ideal frequency and volume landmarks. So this is where that really comes in handy for people like professional bodybuilders and people who are trying to become bodybuilders or who are just very serious about hypertrophy training. So using that index chart that I gave you in the last class, you could devise a multiple session per day training split throughout your week in which you are training your individual muscles at their ideal frequencies. Training things like your back and quads less frequently and your smaller muscle groups more frequently. This is something that is going to require some auto-regulation over time because everyone is going to be a little bit different, okay? So that's something you are going to have to figure out for yourself or with the help of a professional trainer and programmer like myself. And if this sounds overwhelmingly complicated, don't worry because I'm here to assist you if you want to do this but don't want to have to figure it out for yourself. And you also will not have to do it for very long. But that being said, if you are not a professional athlete or trying to become one, and you do not have the time or need for all of that volume and complication, then that is just fine. Just stay at a 3 to 4 times per week full body split or a 5 to 6 times per week upper lower split if you have the time for that, and focus on doing progressive overload by raising the intensity through load and technical difficulty and reps and auto-regulation. You do not have to add so many sets that you are into your MRV and are doing too much work to be doing only 1 session per day. And as you've learned on my classes on loading and effort and intensity, there are plenty of ways for you to increase the intensity and do progressive overload without increasing the volume so much. And beyond loading and effort and intensity, there's also technique and technical difficulty and auto-regulation.